Dad, after services, they shared a birthday, and he said, yes, you, me, and Martin Luther. They all had November 10th birthdays. So thinking about my father today, along with Pastor Jovag and Martin Luther. So the devotions from Christ in Our Home today is about friendship. The prayer concern is those in need of friendship. I'm going to read a verse from 1 Thessalonians 3, verse 9. How can we thank God enough for you in return for all the joy we have in the presence of our God because of you? And so the author of this devotion says, when we met, my new friend Casey was deeply hungry for God. Knowing that I am a Christian, Casey asked me for guidance. How does one get to know God? I'm usually pretty dense when God is trying to use me, but even I couldn't miss this hint. We set up a regular Tuesday evening conversation. I thought I was doing a good thing in giving my friendship and wisdom to a person in need. Little did I know how God would bless me. Our friendship has grown deep and strong. I find my friend's eagerness for God refreshing, and now I turn to Casey for encouragement in my own troubles. I don't consider Casey my holy project, but our friendship is a part of God's project to bless us both. As with Paul, who was called by God to the Thessalonians, the relationship sends joy two ways. Enough that it has begun to overflow and affect our other relationships. Friendship is vital to God's mission to renew the whole earth. Praise God, from whom all blessings flow. And a short prayer. Good God, thank you for the gift of friendship. In the name of our friend Jesus, amen.
Thank you. And now I need to share one more thing with you folks, and that is there's a chat box at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions you want to ask our speakers, please write the question in the chat box, and that we'll use after Pastor Tim is through with his presentation. And now I have the privilege of turning the program over to Tim Peterson, who was an interim pastor at Mindekirken and has known a lot of the people that were attending Tuesday Open House. They ended up that he knew them from previous times, but he also now has invited so many guests that it's wonderful. We have a very good participation. So please welcome Pastor Tim Peterson.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Marilyn. And thank you all for joining today. Yes, and Sherry, I believe it was Sherry that suggested this. Sherry came up to Mount Carmel in September, and it was a lot of fun to see her here. And it's really great to be back. Of course, we wish you could be back there and enjoying those waffles and the smørbrød for Tuesday Open House, and to be talking to everybody in person. But of course, as I mentioned before, the special thing about this is here we have people from my last two congregations joining together, with all the people that have joined in from Oslo, as well as the people from Mindekirken, and then of course various other friends and acquaintances that we have. I'm giving a presentation today about my trips to Norway. I feel very blessed to have had all the opportunities that I have had to go to Norway. And you know, a lot of people at Mindekirken, when I came there as interim pastor, it was just so amazing that all of those people had been associated with Norway, many of them for their whole lives. And for me, I always knew I was a Norwegian American. My great-grandparents on my mother's side came from Norway, but I never really paid too much attention to that. But through a kind of an amazing sequence of events, we have the privilege of going to Norway and really learning a lot about my Norwegian heritage. Let's see, I need to share my screen here, see if I remember how to do that.
Tim, at the bottom of the screen, there's a green button that says share screen. Click on that.
Right, okay. There, how's that?
Great.
Great.
Okay, very good. So, as I was preparing this presentation, you know, I've had so many opportunities of being in Norway and have met so many people. It's really hard to focus in and limiting on what all I'm going to talk about. But excuse me. There really are this series of events that allowed me to understand who I am as a Norwegian American, and has allowed me to appreciate Norway and Norwegianness. And it all started back in 1964 when we took a family trip to Norway. Now, you notice in this picture, there's a picture of me standing there in this picture. That's not from 1964, actually, but it is a picture of the home where my great-grandfather, Evan Leithy, was born in Valdres, Bangi Valdres. And we also went to Oslo and Mjøndalen. So I'll be talking about that, about the family trip to Norway in 1964, when I was 8 years old. The next big thing for me was the 2 military trips. I went to Norway twice with the Minnesota National Guard for training together with the Norsk Heimeverne. And those were in 1990 and 2008. After that, I was able to arrange 6 business trips to Norway from 2011 to 2016. Most of those trips, and for most of those trips, Donna and I lived in Drammen. And here's a picture from Drammen on 17. Mai 2014, the 200th anniversary of the Norwegian Constitution. This is looking at the bridge that connects the 2 parts of Drammen, and in the background we see the Bragernes Church, and behind that the hill there, which is called Spiraltoppen. Well, and the next very important thing was being interim pastor at Minnesota. Now, isn't that quite a picture we have here? Yes, and there are the waffles there, and there's the smørbrød, and there are all our friends together at Minnesota, and we look forward to being there in person again very soon. After I left Minnesota, last year, we arranged a tour of Norway. I had memorized the Gospel of Mark in Norwegian, and I presented it 26 times around Norway during Lent of 2019. And there we are at the Melby Bedehus, one of the places where we had a presentation. Donadi's maiden name is Melby. Her ancestors came from this farm where there now is a Bedehus. And then finally, of course, we got to go to Norway and be the interim pastor of the American Lutheran congregation. And of course, that just seems like it was kind of like yesterday. And we stayed there until the COVID epidemic hit. We were on the last flight out of Amsterdam. And I continued to serve the congregation for a month remotely here from Mount Carmel. And then, of course, very strange for all of our friends in Norway, we didn't get to say goodbye in person, but we're looking forward to coming back. Finally, then, here we are at Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel is a Bible camp, a Christian retreat center by Alexandria, Minnesota. We have a long-time connection with Mount Carmel. My parents met each other here, and we believe Mount Carmel is a wonderful place of preaching God's word and enjoying the beauty of God's creation. We have a wonderful lake here, Lake Carlos, of course, in the back of this picture. And then here is for our family camp. This is a picture of everybody attending family camp. It's hard to pick out individuals here, but if you look right in the middle of the front, you see the two older people. That happens to be my mom and my dad. And my head is sticking out between them. And Donna D's head is there to the right of my dad's, though hardly visible. Okay, so all those pieces kind of fit together. The family trip, the military trips, the business trips, and then serving as pastor at Middelkirken, the Marcus Evangeliet tour, and then being at the American Lutheran congregation in Oslo. I'm going to talk about each of the parts of these again. First of all, just a diagram or a map that shows where Donadies and my family came from in Scandinavia. My father is a Swede, so it's kind of down in the lower right-hand corner there. You see Söderåkra in Småland is where my father's family came from. My mother's family came from Vangivalders. Their name was Leithi. And my mother's father's family came from Nordfjord. Their name was Weltzin. Donadi's family, her father's family, came from Tunne, which is now part of Sarpsborg. And then her mother's family came from Sandnes, just south of Stavanger. And and there also are relatives that came from Sørkedalen in just in north west of Oslo. Here is a picture of the Stavkirke, Hurra Stavkirke, where my great-grandfather Evan Leithi was baptized. And beside that, the picture of the grave outside the church where my great-great-grandparents were buried. And then here is a picture of my great-great-grandparents, the parents that stayed behind in Norway when 5 of their children went to the United States. Another 5 did stay in Norway. So the family kind of split in two. My great-grandfather, Evan Leithi, was 16 years old when he left Vang and came to Battle Lake, Minnesota. He never saw his family again. When he was older, some of the relatives suggested, well, you could take a trip back across the ocean, but he said, I was so sick coming over, I would never go back, never go on the ocean again. I'd like to say a little bit, though, how I got to Norway in 1964. You know, our family was very fortunate. So many families lose connection with the Norwegian relatives. But we had, my grandmother's sister wrote to her cousins in Norwegian. She knew Norwegian very well. And in fact, Norwegian was the native language of both of my grandparents. Even though they were born in Minnesota, they grew up speaking Norwegian as their first language. But my grandmother's sister was writing to her cousins. And then my mother's sister became a missionary in Japan. And on their way home from Japan once, they came back, visiting Singapore and India and Italy, and went up to Sweden and Norway. And so they visited the relatives in Valdres in 1961. So that when my parents were missionaries in Africa. In 1964, we lived in Paris, where my parents were studying French. And for our vacation, we drove up to visit relatives, both in Sweden and in Norway. And that made a big impression on me as an 8-year-old. And, I think back on that. Moving to Paris, we moved to Paris in April of 1964. And living in Paris was a huge culture shock for me. Everybody seemed unfriendly. Nobody spoke English. Everything was completely strange. And it was a very difficult time of adjustment for me. So then we took this trip and we went up to Norway. And all of a sudden in Norway, everybody was friendly and they were so welcoming. And we even got to watch TV in English because, of course, the Norwegians, they showed the English TV and just had the Norwegian dubbed in. Or not dubbed in, they just said the Norwegian, the words written on there, but the TV shows were still in English. And we had a few relatives who actually spoke English. And that made a big impression on me. And after that, of course, we went back to Paris, and I made it through our year in Paris. And I guess it wasn't really all that bad. But I still had the impression of Norway as being a wonderful place. And that, of course, was my start in my Norwegianness. It wouldn't have gone much farther than that, though, except I joined the Minnesota National Guard as a chaplain. And the Minnesota National Guard has an arrangement with the Norwegian Home Guard, the Heimeverne, that we send 100 soldiers to Norway every year. And Norway sends 100 soldiers here to Minnesota. Well, I got to go on the trip, both in 1990 and in 2008. This is a picture of the staff in 2008. It might be a little hard to recognize me. I'm the third from the left there. And I look at that picture, and I don't think there's any picture that's ever showed me looking like heavier than that one. But we were wearing the Norwegian military uniforms, and then we had these winter camo outfits over the top of our uniforms, and we did winter military training, and really had a wonderful time. Here's a picture of us skijuring. Skijuring is an English word that comes from the Norwegian word skisjuring, traveling on skis. And we're being pulled here by a Norwegian military vehicle. It's kind of like a big snowmobile. And this is the way the Norwegian military travels from place to place in winter. Of course, when we did it, it was kind of like a game. The driver kept going faster and faster, round and round in circles until we all fell off. And this isn't actually a picture of me in here, but if you can picture me, I was the very first one closest to the big snowmobile. And when we were going really fast, I was the first one that fell, and everybody behind me ran into me, which is one of my less pleasant memories about the trip. Then we stayed in snow caves, snøhuler. It's a little hard to see, and in fact, on the very right, you see the open mouth of a snow cave, and it's kind of in the middle of the picture. There's also another snow cave. On both of our trips, we built ourselves snow caves and stayed overnight out in the snow. In addition to that, besides the trips to Norway, I was also involved with the Norwegian exchange at Camp Ripley. I got to go to Norway twice, but many other years I was at Camp Ripley being with the Norwegian soldiers. And especially after I decided to learn Norwegian, I made sure to be up there every year because this was one place where I could actually try to learn Norwegian and talk to Norwegian soldiers. Here I am with one of the Norwegian feltprest. The Norwegian word for military chaplain is feltprest, a field priest. And I actually have a little video of a little music here. Unfortunately, it's way too short, but take a listen. That's actually a little bit out of Day by Day, Blått Dag. One more time. You don't get to hear very much of it. It's such a short clip, but here it is. So there it is at Camp Ripley with the Norwegian soldiers. And on one occasion, we actually had a visit from the head chaplain. The chief of chaplains of the Norwegian military came to visit Camp Ripley because of our relationship with the Norwegian Home Guard. And at the time, I was the head chaplain in the state of Minnesota, and so I helped entertain the chaplain there at Camp Ripley. So those are the Army trips, the military trips. But what's really significant about that is in the second trip in 2008, I had a desire when I was in Norway of being a pastor in Norway. And I really think there was a sense of God's calling. It's hard to know specific things that God wants you to do in life. And at least I think that's hard to know. I mean, God wants us to listen to him and hear his word and to follow Jesus, but to actually have a specific direction like you go be a pastor in Norway. It's hard to know if that was valid or not, but I had this very great desire to be a pastor in Norway. And so much so that I started learning the Norwegian language. I knew very, very little Norwegian. I had very little understanding of Norway at the time, but I began my efforts at learning Norwegian. One of the first things that Donadie and I did is we joined Sons of Norway because I thought, oh, here we are among other Norwegian Americans. We can speak Norwegian with them. Well, that wasn't very useful. We love Sons of Norway. We're still members of it, but it wasn't much of a place to learn Norwegian. We started coming to Minneskirken occasionally, which of course was much, much better because there we actually found people who spoke Norwegian. And then we had a breakthrough that we were able to arrange business trips to Norway. And how it happened is, I was in the software industry. I was full-time as a pastor, coming out of seminary for 14 years. But in 1995, I went into a software business. Donadie and I had our own software company. And in 2010, Donna, that I got hired by Microsoft to do that course. 2010 or 2011, I wrote a course for Microsoft, and I taught that course at their headquarters in Redmond, Washington, and in Hong Kong and in London. And from London, then, I volunteered to speak to the database users group in Norway. No, not in Norway, in Sweden. So we went to Malmö and Stockholm and started making some business contacts so that they arranged for me to have a trip of teaching around Scandinavia. So I taught a one-day course in Stockholm, Gothenburg, Copenhagen, Oslo, and Bergen. Now that was the first time Donna D came along. It was the first time you were in Norway.
Yes.
First time Donna went to Norway. And I had one of these very wonderful occurrences that when I was teaching in Oslo, I think I had 7 students, but one of them worked for a company in Drummond, and he emailed me a day after the course saying, we need some more help with this software. Can you come and help us? And that resulted in us having 4 trips to Drummond, working for a Norwegian company called Connexus, and getting lots of wonderful friends in Drummond, and gave us the chance to really try to speak Norwegian. Now, of course, we found that when you're in Norway, everybody speaks English, and that makes it hard to learn Norwegian, but it really gave us a sense of what it was like to live in Norway. And one of the times we actually were in Drummond for 3 months. We love the churches in Norway. The church in the center there is the Free Church, the Lutheran Free Church in Drummond. That was the church that we attended most frequently. The church on the right is Norwegian, associated with Nur Mission. We would often go to their Sunday evening services. And then, of course, the church on the left is the Bragernes Church, beautiful, towering church, and kind of you can see it from the middle of town, and it just kind of dominates over the town's skyline. The Bragernes Church is actually the first church where I presented the entire Gospel of Mark from memory. While we were in Norway, of course, on these 6 business trips, we had a lot of opportunities. I mean, I was working, but we also did spend some time sightseeing, and we visited relatives. Turns out that Donna D had some relatives that lived next door in Lier, and we had other relatives. We visited the relatives down in Tuna, and oh yeah, and there's a picture of Donna by the statue of Johan Grutemsbrotten. Turns out that Donna's grandmother had a first cousin who was a 5-time Olympic champion and one of the greatest cross-country skiers and ski jumpers in Norwegian history, Johan Grutemsbrotten. And there's this statue of him up on Frognerseteren, close by the Holmenkollen ski area. And we visited my family. Again, some pictures from Volders, some picture for the picture on the left there is from Mjøndalen. The man on the far right, Knut Holm, was, I met him in 1964. He was a teenager back then when I was 8 years old. And he ended up marrying a woman from California and visited the United States many times. So he got to be the person that we really connected with to keep the families close together. Right now, Knut and his wife Sandra live in Hauge, which is kind of upriver from Drummond. And so at the times that we were in Drummond, we always had many opportunities to get together with them. And on one of those times, we got to go to Preikestolen. In the middle picture there, you see Donna D. It's hard to see her a bit, but I stayed behind. She went ahead over to the cliff. And we got there early in the morning. There was hardly anybody else there. One of our chaplain friends took us there. With the military exchange, every year a Norwegian chaplain came to the United States, just like we always sent a Minnesota chaplain over to Norway. And we've gotten to be very good friends with a number of these chaplains. Okay, that brings me up to the next important place, being interim pastor at Minnekirken. Minnekirken, there are many of you on the call who are not from Minnekirken, who have never been there before. Minnekirken is a congregation that was founded in the 1920s, at the time that all the other congregations were switching from Norwegian over to English, all the other Norwegian American churches. And the leaders, the national leaders of the church, decided that they wanted one congregation that would keep the Norwegian language and Norwegian worship. And Minneskirken was built to do that, and the congregation was founded to do that. And of course, they still have pastors, as like Anne Britt from Norway, from the Church of Norway. And of course, I got to be interim pastor there. It's actually quite hard for them to find interim pastors who are willing to try to speak Norwegian. For me, it was the best Norwegian language lesson I could possibly have, because every week I had to preach a sermon in Norwegian. And so I would write it out in English. Then I would use Google Translate. And then, of course, I would fix it up because Google Translate always would mess up part of it. And so I would work on that sermon. I would try to get as good Norwegian as I possibly could. And then I would get help from a real Norwegian speaker so that I could actually hope to say the right things and to pronounce it correctly. Every week I worked on that for it ended up being like 16 months, because of course Anne Britt, who was coming, had trouble with immigration, and I guess some things never change, those troubles with immigration. But Minneskirken is a wonderful congregation, and those of you who have never been there before, I hope you get to go there. They have some wonderful concerts. There's the Lucia pageant each year in December, keeping alive a lot of Norwegian traditions here in Minnesota. And of course, Tuesday open house. As we are joined together in Tuesday open house today, on this Tuesday, Tuesday open house has been a very special part of the ministry at Minneskirken, and of course something that we all miss very much. Varsågod. Okay, after we left Minneskirken, now this is actually getting to be recent history here. We left Minneskirken about 2 years ago in December. We were done there. Anne Britt had come, and I arranged a tour of Norway in Lent in 2019, where I would present the Gospel of Mark from memory. My strategy in learning the Norwegian language was to memorize the Gospel of Mark. And I had memorized the Passion narrative from the Gospel of Mark in English way back in my first year as a pastor. And I would present that from memory on Palm Sunday each year. And it always seemed like people listened to that sermon better than any other sermon I preached. And so I decided, when I was going to learn Norwegian, I decided to start with the Passion narrative from the Gospel of Mark. And I had the privilege of presenting that on Palm Sunday at Minneskirken. And more than once, and then on Good Friday. And it was my way of learning Norwegian. And it was a way of learning Norwegian because I had recordings of it. I could really try to focus in on the pronunciation. It's hard to learn a language. It's hard to learn a language when you're not a child. And I started learning Norwegian. I started really trying to learn Norwegian when I was in my 50s. And the mouth just doesn't make those new sounds. I know at Minneskirken, I struggled to learn the sound in Kirkekaffe. And I remember kind of stuttering over that in church, saying, and now let's all go to Kirkekaffe. And my Norwegian, the Norwegian friends at Minneskirken would say, "Oh, you're trying too hard. Just say it. don't stutter over it. But you know, it is hard to learn all those songs, all those sounds. But my strategy was to learn it by learning the Gospel of Mark, and I did memorize the whole Gospel of Mark in Norwegian. It was a very big job, but it was a blessing to me. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the language. I enjoyed hearing God's word in the language of my grandparents. So here are the 26 presentations of the Gospel of Mark, and it shows I put a star at each place I made a presentation. We started over on the left-hand side. We flew into Stavanger, and we had a presentation, 3 presentations in that area. Then we went over to Kristiansen's church. We stayed with Pastor Sundt, the previous, who was pastor at Minneskirken before I came. Well, you can see all the places there. Up north, that's the Bodø area and the island of Røst. But here is the list. The 2 schools over in the Stavanger area, and then Hund Church in Gjøvik, Østini Church in Nordland. Hund Church is the church where Jens Dale, former pastor of Minneskirken, is pastor there. Østini Church is where Kristian Sundt is pastor. And all of these other places, you know, we had connections. Again, now we had connections from the military. We had connections from my time working at Connexus in Drummond, from being around in Drummond and knowing people there. We had some of these connections came through relatives, through family, through our family, and especially the ones in the 2 in Vulders. And then others came through friends from Minneskirken. As I was preparing for this tour, I came to Tuesday Open House and I talked about it. And I asked people to help me, to help find places that I could give presentations in Norway. And many of you suggested places. I made so many requests, sent so many emails asking to make presentations. And in fact, with the 26 presentations I made, there were far more than that that didn't work out. Sometimes they wanted a presentation, but then it didn't happen. Of course, there are many emails that I didn't get any response from at all. But we had, as you can imagine, looking at this map, we had a wonderful tour of Norway. And we were there 7 weeks. So it was like 3 or 4 presentations each week. But we had a lot of time for sightseeing. We met so many wonderful people. We spent time with our friends in Drummond. We spent times with my family up in Vulders. We met some relatives for the first time. Here is the presentation at the Tryggheim Forus school in Stavanger. Forus is a part of the city of Stavanger on the south side of Stavanger. Happens to be that one of Donna's great-grandmothers was born there, was from Forus. So that was kind of fun to go to the school there. Here we are at the Hund Church in Gjøvik, and we had a little bit of a Minneskirken's pastors reunion there with Trude and Jens Dale, Kristian Sundt, Jurid and Ole Amund Gillebo, and us. And together with, of course, a bunch of other people from the congregation, we had a wonderful evening there. Then we were with Pastor Gunnar Kristiansen up north. Gunnar hosted us for 10 days. He took us out to the island of Røst. In the middle there, you see the cod drying on the fish rafts. And then that cod turns into, what's that called? On the right-hand side, we were given the turfisk, of course, turfisk. dried fish, which is so famous for the Lofoten Islands, and in particular in Røst. The lower left-hand side there is Gunnar also took us up into the mountains up above Glomfjord, where he lives, and of course the snow was still piled up very high. Yeah, in the area of the Svartisen glacier. So we had these presentations all over, and I just have a few more pictures of them. Several of the ones on this page are from the pastors' conference. I was able to present the Gospel of Mark to a group of pastors from the what was that? I have to look now. I start forgetting all these things. Oh yeah, the Øvre Telemark Prusti. So lots of wonderful presentations, meeting lots of people. We enjoyed Seljord so much. We actually made it to Seljord twice, once for the pastors' conference and once for a presentation in the church there. And wonderful friends. We met so many people, and as I was getting this presentation ready, I was thinking, how can I mention all the people that we met? And I just can't. They just went on and on and on. Friends that we've known for many years, new friends, and I thank all of you for so many of you helping us to meet these people. We had a great time. One of the places we visited was Hans Nielsen Hauge's house in Preikestolen. And the picture of that door in the lower right-hand side, I don't know if you remember this, but at Minneskirken a couple of years ago, we were raising money to help remodel the Hauge house, which again is a museum in honor of Hans Nielsen Hauge. And the money we raised in Minneskirken was used to restore the door there. And it turned out to be a very expensive project because the door had to be replaced with a door that was what would be more original for the house and not the door that had been there. So it of course, that kind of thing gets to be very, very expensive. My last day of the presentation, I call this a Lenten journey. But of course, we were there for Holy Week and Easter. On Easter Sunday morning, we were at the Sørkedalen church, again, where one of Donadi's great-grandmothers was from, or great-grandmother? Great-grandmother, I think. Great-grandmother. And we met, and after church, we went and met relatives. And then Sunday afternoon, on Easter Sunday in the afternoon, I went to a high security prison, again, brought in by one of my chaplain friends, that I got to do the Gospel of Mark there. So after all that, we had such a wonderful trip. We came back to the States, and while I was in Norway on this trip, I went to the synod office in Bodø, the Sør-Hålogaland bispedømme, a kantor, and I applied for a job to be a pastor, an interim pastor in the Church of Norway in Sør-Hålogaland. They have a need for so many pastors up north in Norway that I was going to beg them, well, I don't know Norwegian very well, but please take me on. Well, I went into the office, I tried to impress them with my Norwegian speaking, and I couldn't understand a single word they were saying to me. And they were very nice, but they said, no, we don't want you as a pastor. Come back after you learn Norwegian. And so it was kind of disappointing. It was, well, I was really very disappointed, wasn't I?
Yeah.
So we came back to the States, still wanting to be a pastor in Norway and not knowing how it could happen. But then in July, I got a call from the president of the American Lutheran congregation. They had an interim pastor lined up, but he was unable to come because of some health issues. and they asked me if we could come. And so a month and a half later, we were on our way back to Norway, and we served the American Lutheran congregation for 7 months until COVID chased us back to the United States. And we had a wonderful time. The American Lutheran congregation is really of course, a very impressive building. You see the outside of it here, and see a picture of the sanctuary on Christmas Eve. But even more than the building, of course, it's a very impressive group of people. Founded in the 1950s, when there were a lot more Americans living in Oslo. And over the years, it's become a very international congregation because people move to Oslo and they want to worship, and they don't understand Norwegian. So they were looking for a place where they could worship in a language they could understand, and they would come to the American Lutheran congregation in Oslo. The congregation has members from at least 30 different countries. I remember one time we were at a prayer meeting last fall. We had 11 people at the prayer meeting. I think they were from 9 different countries. And it is such a delight, was such a delight for us to meet all the people there and to be able to serve there as pastor. Well, as I mentioned previously, we still feel badly of leaving and not being able to say goodbye to people in person. And we so much look forward to our next trip back to Norway, where we can see our congregation again at the American Lutheran congregation. Again, I served there through Easter. Well, we left in March, but I kept on serving there through Easter. They had a new pastor was called, but the new pastor wasn't allowed to come, but she finally has been allowed to come. And I wish to congratulate all of you at the American Lutheran congregation that you'll finally be getting your new pastor. I believe she is arriving in a couple of weeks. And so she will be able to be there for Christmas this year. And so there, the pilgrimage kind of ends here in Alexandria. So this is not Norway here, but Mount Carmel actually was a camp that was started by the Lutheran Bible Institute. The Lutheran Bible Institute was started by Swedish and Norwegian folks who were kind of on the pietist side. And well, actually very much on the pietist side, followers of Hans Nielsen Hauge in Norway or Carl Zinius in Sweden. And we have a wonderful place here, and people come here, they enjoy the beauty of it, but we have a very Bible-centered program. We have this thing called Family Camp, where we bring in seminary professors and other pastors to teach the adults, and we have a great teachings for the kids. We also have some camps just for adults. We have cabin rental and daily Bible study year-round, and we have weekend retreats for congregations, and we invite you all to come to Mount Carmel. Yes, and that includes those of you in Norway. My vision someday is, I know there are these tour groups that go around to, they come to Minnesota, going in the steps of the immigrants, and they go to Moorhead, and they go out to Høstfest, and some of them come to Minneskirken, and I want them also to make a stop here in Alexandria. After all, we do have the big statue of Big Ole downtown, and we've got the Kensington runestone here in Alexandria. But more important than that, we have Mount Carmel, a place that is keeping this tradition of the faith alive. And here we actually have a cabin here at Mount Carmel, the Hans Nielsen Hauge Memorial Cabin. And we have other cabins that are named in honor of Carl Zinius and Lena Sandell and Grundtvig and the other Scandinavian Christian leaders. This particular cabin, the Hans Nielsen Hauge cabin, was given by my parents in honor of Evan and Bertina Lythe. Again, Evan Lythe is my great-grandpa who came from Valders, who came from Vung, 1884, when he was 16 years old. And that's what I'd like to close with. Evan's home in that he left when he was 16, the church where he was baptized. One of the stops on our tour during Lent, of course, was I got to preach at the Hurrida Stav Church here on a Sunday morning. And of course, what preaching meant was to give a short introduction and then to present a part of the Gospel of Mark from memory. So there it is. Mange takk. Yeah. Thank you all for coming and giving me the chance to do this. I wish it could be in person, and we certainly look forward to coming back to the time when we can be in person again. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And now we have, at least there's one question that I see in the chat box. Tim, can you check your chat box and see if you can see the question?
Oh, I have to look at my chat box?
Yes, down at the bottom of your screen.
Still open in Norway.
Our church building still open in Norway despite COVID-19. Well, you know, they were all closed down as tight as can be, and then they opened up, and now they've all been shut down again. Norway had much, much less of the virus than we had in Minnesota. Much less. They still have had much less than we've had in Minnesota, but they have, they have now shut down again. Things are not going well.
And
Did I have to leave Oslo in such a hurry to get out? Our choice was not knowing if we'd be able to leave for a long period of time. Yeah, you know, I had the job lined up to start at Mount Carmel, and a new pastor was lined up to come to the American Lutheran congregation. And so we made the decision. Well, and my dad's health was not very good. That was another part of the concern. So to stay in Norway, you know, I regretted leaving. And then, of course, when the new pastor has been unable to come, and so Norway, I mean, the congregation has had a second interim pastor, really, waiting for the new pastor to come. I feel badly about it, but I did have this new job, and so, you know, I had to make the choice. And you know, at that time, people were being advised to go home, and so, you know, it was a little tricky. How many cabins at Mount Carmel? We have 50 units of either cabins or rooms in our lodge. And do we have family reunions? Absolutely, we have family reunions. This is the best place in the world for a family reunion. So we welcome you to come to a family reunion. We welcome you to just come and stay and come for the daily Bible study or to come to one of our other programs. So
if there are not any more questions, I really want to say thank you for the most wonderful overview of one's perspective of Norway in various occupations, because it really gave you a good overview of Norway. So I know all of us want to thank you very much for today. Sherry or Anna Britt, would you like to say anything?
Yeah.
Anna Britt?
Yes, I thank you very much, Peter, and thank you very much, everybody that is in the Zoom meeting here. And I will just say that the Norwegian Memory Church is closed in a way, but it is open for online services. Every Sunday we have 2 services, one in English and one in Norwegian. and you will find them on mindekirken.net and in YouTube. And you search for Mindekirken. And on the net, you will see all of them. You can see it whenever you want to see them. So we will continue to have services on net. The whole year, because we are afraid for the virus. So, and I will say what I usually say on Tuesday Open House. Herren velsigne deg og bevare deg. Herren la sitt ansikt lyse over deg og være deg nådig. Herren løfte sitt åsyn på deg og gi deg fred. Amen.
Thank you very much. And please note, everyone is saying thank you, Tim. We certainly appreciate your taking the time to speak with us today. It's been a wonderful session. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody, for coming, and fun to see you, both in Mindekirken and in Norway, and again, some friends from some other places. We see friends, yes, friends from other places. Thank you very much. And we look forward to getting together again. It's going to be wonderful when we can all get together again. Thank you.
It's been a great day. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Stay safe. Stay safe. Stay well.
You too.
All right, thank you.
Where is Esther?